Subtlety is not PlatinumGames' strong suit. This is a studio known for their over-the-top action and robust combat systems, for creating games with almost too much style. These are titles with tight, white-knuckle gameplay, extravagant set pieces, and immaculate vibes. And if there's one game that serves as a calling card for the whole company, it's Bayonetta. Bayonetta was the first PlatinumGames production directed by Hideki Kamiya, the same person who directed the first Devil May Cry, and a bunch of other certified bangers. Like its spiritual predecessor, Bayonetta is a character action game that throws the player into lightning-fast brawl after lightning-fast brawl. The titular witch has an easy-to-learn, tough-to-master combat system at her disposal to take down gargantuan foes. Bayonetta no doubt packs a punch, but I would argue the game's most interesting mechanic isn't an offensive one, but a defensive one. Enter Witch Time. Like most things in Bayonetta, it's relatively simple. When an enemy is just about to strike, hit one of the shoulder buttons to roll out of the way. Doing so will activate Witch Time, which slows everyone else down, allowing the player to get in a few easy strikes. And yeah, that's about it. A simple mechanic that encourages a specific playstyle. But Witch Time, intentionally or not, asks an important question. How can the parts where the character is not dealing damage be as empowering as the parts where they are? Bayonetta the character is a force to be reckoned with. She's cool, confident, stylish, uncompromising, and will kick your ass without a second thought. While she does have a ranged attack, it's fairly weak compared to her up-close and personal moves. The bulk of her attacks can be performed by hitting some combination of two of the face buttons. The top one controls her arms, and the right one controls her legs. The game has like a billion combos that can be performed by landing these devastating attacks. And it just straight up looks cool. Bayonetta will flip and shoot and slice her way through enemy after enemy. Opponent's armor will fly off piece by piece. Occasionally her hair will come alive and fly through a portal and create a giant foot to stomp the other combatants. Special torture attacks will turn anyone in her way into a bloody pulp. It's great. No matter what, even if the player isn't doing too well, Bayonetta will look powerful, and it all comes down to some combination of these two buttons. Even though she's able to land stylish strikes, Bayonetta can be stomped into the ground if the player isn't careful. When she takes a hit, she takes a hit. This game was released when QuickTime events were all the rage, and missing one will lead to a game over. Therefore, it's important to use the other key move, the dodge. Bayonetta will do a flip, allowing her to quickly get out of harm's way. But a flip that comes at just the right moment, right before she would have otherwise taken damage, activates the all-important Witch Time. Witch Time is an easy way for the player to gain the upper hand in combat. While everything else is moving super slow, well, I guess the implication is that she's moving fast, but whatever, she can get in a string of uninterrupted hits. Activating Witch Time requires the player to read their opponent, listen for the sound cue, and catch the quick flash of light. They observe each other's every move as if they're engaged in a boxing match or a dance. The few seconds of unadulterated power that Witch Time provides, combined with the ultra-stylish moves and the lack of a substantial ranged attack, all encourage the player to run towards a potentially deadly scenario. Take this early boss battle, for example. Bayonetta starts the fight with two fellow witches, both of whom get devoured in a single bite. Bayonetta is trapped on this platform. The monster floats out of reach. For most of the battle, she's stuck to her weak ranged attack. But when one of its heads bites down on the platform, a well-timed dodge will activate Witch Time, allowing her to get some hits in. It's an easy way to deal some damage. So instead of running away from the giant monster heads who just ate two people alive, the player is encouraged to run towards them. The game has established that this is a fearsome foe that will kill you. But it's okay, just run towards it. Dodge. Attack. These burning enemies work in a similar way. Touching them won't do much damage and will harm Bayonetta, but standing in their way and avoiding their attacks will render them defenseless. When Witch Time is active, she will become unstoppable. When time reverts back to normal, the enemies will have the advantage again. By activating Witch Time, the player is in control of this push and pull. Standing in the way of danger leads to a critical advantage. This fight with rival witch Jeanne also sticks out. She gets on her motorcycle and revs up the engine and speeds towards Bayonetta. Instead of, getting out of the way, the player is encouraged to stand right in the middle of her path and dodge at the last second. Jeanne's motorcycle rampage is an attack, sure, but more importantly, it's an opportunity. An opportunity to gain the upper hand. Bayonetta rewards the player for reveling in dangerous situations. At the end of every combat encounter, the player is graded on their performance. their combo streak, which rewards diverse moves and unbroken strings of pain, their clear time, and their damage taken will determine what medal they receive. Getting a gold or platinum medal feels great. Getting anything less than that, and don't look at that. Activating Witch Time is integral to all 3 grading criteria. It allows the player to keep their combo streak going so that she can move about freely for a few seconds. It also helps the player clear the stage faster and avoid taking more damage than they have to. Witch Time spills into every corner of gameplay. It's explicitly encouraged in just about every situation Bayonetta finds herself in. Witch Time defines the entire experience. When I think of Bayonetta, I can't help but think of another game whose combat revolves around dodging. It too came from an independent Japanese developer. It too released in 2009 and shaped the trajectory of its studio, even though tonally they couldn't be more different. In hindsight, it's easy to look at Demon's Souls as a rough draft for what came after, but most of the core DNA of what makes a Souls game is here, complete with the uncompromising combat design. Demon's Souls is a game where just about every enemy has a decent chance of killing you, at least at first. It's a game that rewards careful reads of combat scenarios. The player has to know when to stand back, when to attack, and when to dodge. Without mastering these basics, the game won't let the player get too far. Demon's Souls and its more popular little brothers ask the player to adopt a defensive playstyle. And to do that, the game gives the player a few ways to avoid taking damage. The first and most common way is to just stand back. The game tasks the player with keeping the distance between the player character and the enemy in the forefront of their mind at all times. Doing so will ensure the enemy's attacks miss and the players won't. The game also allows the player to equip shields if desired, so they can block and parry attacks if they're bold enough to do so. And, most iconically, Demon's Souls lets the player roll out of the way. The dodge roll in Demon's Souls grants the player precious invincibility frames, or iframes. When the player rolls, their character will become invincible for a split second. The player can use these slivers of time to take down the fearsome foes standing in their way. On paper, the dodge roll in Bayonetta and the dodge roll in Demon's Souls do the exact same thing. They're defensive moves that give the player an advantage. Both games feature a tiny little character taking down gigantic enemies. Both games are tough but rewarding romps through fantasy lands. Yet the overall feelings that these games give the player couldn't be more different. And while one could chalk that difference up to Demon's Souls' lack of pole dancing, it may truly come down to the dodge roll. One of the things I find fascinating about games is how they're able to change the way a player behaves, as in how the mechanics in a game can encourage a certain playstyle and discourage another. Behaviors, of course, can be easily molded. One of the prevailing theories on behavior modification is operant conditioning, developed by psychologist B.F. Skinner. In operant conditioning, when a subject performs a certain behavior, that behavior is followed by some sort of stimulus. That stimulus will either encourage or discourage that behavior. Operant conditioning has 2 potential goals: reinforcement, which encourages a behavior, and punishment, which discourages a behavior. Reinforcement and punishment come in 2 varieties: positive, which adds a stimulus, and negative, which removes a stimulus. For example, after a week of working at a job, an employee receives a paycheck. Showing up to work has been enforced with positive reinforcement. Changing the battery in a smoke detector removes the annoying chirp. Keeping the smoke detector up and running has been enforced with negative reinforcement. The job wants the employee to show up, and the smoke detector wants the tenant to keep the batteries fresh. Both have achieved their desired outcomes through reinforcement. By contrast, a teacher catching a student texting in class would want to stop that behavior. Scolding the student would be positive punishment. It would add unwanted attention. Taking the phone away would be negative punishment. It would remove something the student wants. In both cases, the teacher would achieve their desired outcome through punishment. The student would stop texting in class. Bayonetta and Demon's Souls both want to encourage a certain behavior. They want the player to watch their opponent's movement and dodge effectively. Even though they have the same goals, the methods of achieving them use different forms of operant conditioning. In Demon's Souls, when an enemy attacks and the player evades at the right time, the enemy's attack will miss. Either it will attack in what is now the wrong direction, or it will strike during those precious frames of invincibility. An unwanted stimulus, danger, has been removed. Demon's Souls encourages the player to use properly timed dodges via negative reinforcement. Of course, Demon's Souls didn't invent this style of defensive play, but its combat system puts a heavy emphasis on it. The game does everything in its power to make the player feel weak, to make the obstacles ahead seem impossible to overcome. The player frequently has to be close to an enemy to strike it, putting them in immediate danger more often. A single strike has the potential to upend an entire run. The health bar is frequently only half full. The worlds are gross and oppressive. Demon Souls is full of danger, but it can be tempered, however briefly, by rolling away from it. Bayonetta also wants the player to dodge, but at the same time it wants to instill a sense of empowerment in the audience instead of fear. So what happens after a successful Bayonetta dodge? The player gets a huge advantage. When Bayonetta flips at just the right time, the entire world will slow down. She'll become practically invincible, not just for a few frames, but for several seconds. A desired stimulus, Witch Time, has been added. Bayonetta encourages the use of properly timed dodges via positive reinforcement. Bayonetta turns the dodge roll on its head, and in doing so, gives its combat system its defining feature. Think back to that first boss battle on the platform. Dodging the giant dragon heads avoids damage, it gives some form of negative reinforcement, but more importantly, it gives the player a key advantage. Without activating Witch Time, the dragon heads only give the player a split-second window of time to land an attack. The motivating force behind the player dodge rolling is that advantage, the promise of Witch Time. The same principle applies to the burning enemies and Jean and the motorcycle. Standing in the way of a dangerous situation is the best way to gain an upper hand. Bayonetta is a game that does everything in its power to make the player feel unstoppable. Getting a good combo streak feels incredible. Stopping mid-fight to perform a torture attack is bloody and brutal, and I love it. Getting a stone or bronze medal after an encounter can feel disheartening, which makes the gold and platinum medals feel all the more empowering. Even though Bayonetta is tiny compared to the horrific angel she cuts to pieces, she can still get the upper hand with ease. Every attack is an opportunity. Every instance of Witch Time is another instance of positive reinforcement. Keep watching your opponent, know when they will strike, dodge roll out of the way, and pummel them. This is the dance of Bayonetta. Of course, there are exceptions. Certain fights are against enemies that are immune to Witch Time, meaning that the player won't be able to turn the tide of battle in their favor. The Evil Harvest Rosary accessory disables Witch Time, but offers another offensive perk, and the highest difficulty setting removes Witch Time entirely. But by the time the player gets to these encounters and the Rosary accessory, they've already learned how to dodge. And if they're playing through the game on the highest difficulty, they've theoretically mastered it. They've already become the unstoppable force the developers have wanted them to become. In a way, Witch Time has served its purpose. The behavior has been learned. Despite their differences, Bayonetta and Demon Souls have surprisingly similar goals. They both want the player to master their combat systems, and that means avoiding damage as much as it means dealing it. Demon Souls crafts a cruel world filled with vicious enemies, but by properly dodging, those enemies aren't dangerous for a few moments. Like in most other games with dodge rolls, the player doesn't get anything extra, only the opportunity to survive for a bit longer. That's that classic negative reinforcement in action. Meanwhile, Bayonetta implements positive reinforcement. It puts the player in the high-caliber heels of an undaunted protagonist. It puts the player in a power fantasy. It does everything it can to build the player up, to make them just as capable as the character they control. Subtlety is not PlatinumGames' strong suit. Their games are loud, bombastic, over-the-top, and kind of stupid in the best possible way. And while their art direction and music and cutscenes help drive the vibe home, the gameplay also has to match. It has to make the player feel loud and unstoppable. Even looking back at this footage, I can't believe that this was me causing all the chaos on screen. Bayonetta, the character, is not scared. She is cool, confident, and always in control of the situation. And while Bayonetta the game can be difficult, the euphoria of success can't be denied. From big moments like defeating a fearsome boss, to the medium ones like getting a good grade on an encounter, to the small ones like pulling off Witch Time, they all coalesce into an undeniable feeling of empowerment. Bayonetta says that it's okay to be reckless. It's okay to stand in the way of an enemy strike. It's the best way to keep the party going. So keep watching, keep dodging, keep fighting, and dance into danger.